We want to start our Museum Midday by recognizing that the Tongass Historical Museum and Totem Heritage Center are located on the traditional lands of the Tontiquan and Sanyaquan people of the Tlingit First Nations. We're grateful for the opportunity to live and learn here in mutual respect and appreciation.
Ilsxílee, if we could have everybody's attention, Marnie's going to talk to you.
Very quick. Hello, welcome. I'm glad to see all of you at today's Museum Midday. This Museum Midday specifically has come about because over the last few years, the Totem Heritage Center has had a number of people calling or emailing us photos of harvested trees in the area and voicing their concerns. And so we really thought it'd be wonderful to have kind of an expert, some suggestions on protocol and tradition and really explaining how this should be done and how to do it right. So these two women have a list of credentials a mile long, but Gloria Burns has been, she's actively on our Totem Heritage Center Advisory Committee, and she's taught harvesting class with us. And Teresa Varnell, she is the cultural coordinator with the Ketchikan Gateway Borough School District. And she's also been a wonderful resource for us as we try to develop our curriculum-based school program. So I will hand it over to them, but thank you both so much.
Thanks, Marnie. Yeah, age before beauty. Oh.
Well, you better get up. Sangay Dl'a Gwa T'awaa is Dalangals Kiltlagan Dio Hadog and Gawagit Unskitne Gogan. Selena Pradovich, Dinan Kaya Au Eatsung, Dolores Churchill, Dinan Au Eatsung, April Churchill, Di Au Eatsung, Dl'a Gwa T'awaa Hinudi Kiang. This is the most condensed version of an introduction to myself and my language and Hotkil. So what I just shared was good people. Thank you for letting me be here to talk with you. I come from Haida and my people are the people Gawagit. I also shared that my Nani Kaya, that means an old Nani, because we try to translate into English, but it doesn't really work. So my great-grandmother was Selena Pradovich. My grandmother, my Nani, is Dolores Churchill, and my mother is April Churchill. My name, my true name is Dl'a Gwa T'awaa, and this name was given to me by our matriarch, who just passed. We're in year 2 now. She gave that to me. It belonged to her sister, her little sister, my auntie. And the translation doesn't translate into English at all. What has happened and what I've just been learning more about is that it identifies strong woman, powerful woman, and so that's how I got my name. And I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be with all of you, and I appreciate people taking time to visit with us. And this is my sister.
Holly Churchill, Di Au Ilsxílee Stáng is Gloria Burns. And I got to do a very abbreviated version of my introduction because she introduced the family. And so for those of you who don't know, Teresa, or Dl'a Gwa T'awaa, is the youngest daughter of the oldest daughter. So
I was worried about that.
So the eldest daughter, she's the youngest daughter of the eldest, and I am the eldest daughter of the youngest. So and we grew up very much with our Nani Dolores. It was common for us to be with our other cousin Carrie Ann at the same age range for the summertime, and we spent those summers with our Nani, harvesting and participating in cultural activities. And so, in traditional sense, we're clan sisters, and we're really sisters almost of the same person because of just how we were raised and what that relationship looks like. And so, and despite that, we come with a different kind of experience when it came to learning harvesting and protocols. And so we really thought it'd be great to have a conversation about the concerns we're having and the joy that we find in the natural world and with our sisters, the cedar trees. where, some of my background, as was said, I am on the Heritage Center board, and my mother was on the Heritage Center board before me, and my grandmother was on the Heritage Center board before her, and my great-grandmother was on the Heritage Center before her. So it's an honor to kind of take that role and participate in that way in the programming and making sure there's a continuity in what that looks like. I also started teaching cedar bark harvesting when my mother, who had previously taught the class, decided she didn't want to anymore, but she still needed people to learn the protocols of harvesting in order for those classes to go. And so really what's going on in the natural world as far as what we're seeing our environment look like due to harvesting really affects me deeply, because I'm always wondering, if it was a student of mine, a student of my mother's, a student of my grandmother's, who, has done something in the forest. And so I have a lot, I could talk a lot, but we're not going to do that. I got ginseng and Red Bull before I came, so that could be a problem for all of you.
It's okay. So I guess we can talk a little bit about our upbringings, because in the way that we were raised, both of us were under the tutelage of each other's mothers, and so that's why we're considered very much sisters. In a lot of different ways. Early on, as a young person, and I mean a very young person, I think this goes with the both of us, I was surrounded by weaving. I was completely immersed in the harvesting world, and I can remember, and I don't have the best memory, but that my most favorite memories are being in the forest with my aunties and with my mom and with my nanny, and our nanny Kaya, who was still packing us around at her elderly age. She passed away when I was 7 years old, but every moment that I remember that's meaningful to me was almost always in the forest or being back at home, and us being again immersed in the weaving world. My mother was a weaver, and she taught me very early on. I wove my first basket when I was 4 years old, and it's in the Kevorkian Museum, and I tried to see if I could get my hands on it, and I said no way. But like Gloria, our evenings, our late evenings, our mornings, our days were observing in the traditional way. There was no asking questions or having inquiry besides sharing with your visual inquiry. And so we were just raised watching and learning in that capacity. My mother was a late night weaver because she was a mother of three and I was the baby. And so she would stay up late at night, and that's the time that we spent the closest time together. Is she'd be weaving, and I would be watching. And she refused to put me into preschool because I'd be too tired, and then we'd weave in the morning together. But she did teach me. She homeschooled me. Yeah. And so that's a little bit of the history of how this journey began. Through that, we were all often in the woods together. It's very central to our life. It's been central to who we are as human beings. To this day, it's central to who I am as a human being, being very connected to the world around us, the natural world, the living world, and the spiritual world. And so our cedars are very much my sisters. They're very much, I hold them in high regard. I also feel uncomfortable sometimes using the word like them. It's like calling food, like our salmon and our beautiful herring eggs that just got here. It feels very uncomfortable to call it food because our connection we have a relationship. And so we try to adapt to the English language and make sure that other people are able to comprehend what the messages that we're trying to share. But that's the same experience with the cedars, that they are very much my therapists and they're forgiving. And a lot of our time has been with the cedars every day of our lives in some way, shape, or form.
And so, one of the things is her mother was a ballet instructor, and she was a baker, and she was a business owner, and she had all these things that she was. For me, my mom is to this day a commercial artist and a teacher, But that really came, she had this knowledge that she grew up with, and she, at one time, she had to leave logging camp. She had to find a way to live. And the way she found a way to live was that she was able to turn to her sisters, the cedar trees, and she was able to take that knowledge that she had and make a way for herself outside of that relationship. And so, you know, the experience that I had was a little bit different from Teresa's, and that they got to late night weave, and every moment of the day that Mom could weave, you know, was weaving during the day, making sure, you know, that it was Christmas, it was shoes, it was everything, and it's not easy to be an artist. It's a difficult when it's your only income, right? And that what is, and thankfully she has the gift of being an amazing teacher, and so that teaching, you know, translated into something different. But throughout my journey with my mom, as we started learning, as I harvested with her and did everything really, we all knew in our family that going out and knowing the respectful ways to harvest, knowing how to be connected in a good way, and paying attention to all the other people are utilizing that space, people's impression of a weaver was going to directly impact whether or not my family was eating or not. And so, you know, there was this cultural connection, right? There was this amazing cultural connection that we had, and that we did, and there was also this aspect of, you know, we all had to know and be part of what that looked like to make sure that everything was taken care of. And this is on Facebook, right? I just said about my dad. Okay, well, hopefully my dad doesn't ever watch the weaving things, and thankfully, you know, there's a truth when you're young, right? And you don't know all those things, and he was young and he didn't know all those things, and he's gotten through it. But I'm not going to dismiss my mother's experience and what that was like for us as we went ahead and addressed those things, because they're a part of why the cedar tree is so important to me, why the forest, why that health and that spiritual connection, and what it looks like, you know, is so deeply ingrained. And I think why, you know, and as I got older, right, we really looked at, a little bit older. I'm not as old as Teresa. But we're just a year apart. So as we go through, and we're really going to take you a walk through, you know, the things that we were expected, the way we're expected to act in the woods, how we're supposed to leave those woods, and what our spiritual interactions, our physical interactions are in that. Really hoping to kind of dissect maybe some of the things we're seeing around us, and the ways in which we can be better stewards together and understand what it looks like to leave an ecosystem as strong as it was previously. Like, we have a responsibility to make sure that forest isn't just the same way that it is, but it's better, that we're adding to that. And so,
well, this was almost I think everybody here, but maybe other people who are not watching, this is it was considered almost an extinct art form.
Mm-hmm.
And I should say this too, in our language, we don't have a word for art. This is very new. Everything was beautiful, but it was utilitarian. Everything had a purpose. And so there's no word in Hatkil for art. It's just like our language. We don't have a word for please, because it's embedded in who we are, the way we conduct ourselves, the way that we talk to one another. Respect is already embedded into our language, so we don't ask. Please is just isn't something that you would have to say. You already know how you conduct yourself.
Yeah.
Same with art. It just doesn't exist in our language, but it's pretty incredible and unavoidable to know that it's incredible art pieces that we have, that we get to see.
Mm-hmm. I think we wanted to talk about springtime. Like I was telling Teresa before we got in the car, I looked outside, I was like, man, I want to go get a cedar tree because it looks so pretty, and you think that you could right now. And I have seen people going out to try to harvest a tree right now, which I just want to caution everybody, is just so detrimental to the forest. So it's going to be, there is a season for cedar and there is a time. And generally in our family, we didn't check the trees at least until Mother's Day, right? And then even at Mother's Day, it might not be ready because you're making sure how far is the snow down on the mountain? Is there snow still on the ground? Do you think, is there any snow in the weather forecast?
What birds do you hear?
What birds do you hear? You know, have the pussy willows bloomed? Like there's a bunch of different things that you're looking at. You know, what stage does this look like? And really because, you know, we are caretakers of that forest and we need to make sure that we don't kill those trees. And so, you know, I see people be like, oh man, it's sunshiny, you can pull it off, it's gonna be fine. But the reality is one cold snap and that cedar tree is dead, right? And so there's the conversation. Can you do it and should you do it, right? And yes, you can get cedar off sometimes early. Should you? No, absolutely not, because what that's going to go ahead and do is it will kill the tree. And it's not respectful to the season and the time. There was a reason why we did things in certain months and how we did them. And so, you know, if we hit a Mother's Day and there's still snow on the ground, then you're not checking the tree. And you know, and when we check a tree, I'll let Teresa speak to her experience, but when I check a tree for my mom, she'll, you know, we'll look around, you take one tiny little piece off, you take the little starter piece. So I try not to pick a really beautiful tree, because if it doesn't come off, then I'm not going to be able to finish that tree, to get the appropriate amount of bark. And so you check the tree, and by checking the tree, it means that you're taking just the tiniest little piece, and you're checking to see what the sap looks like. How does the bark feel? What's the grain look like? And how does it smell? You know, there are a variety of things that tree is telling you that will indicate to you whether or not we have hit harvesting season. What elevation are you at? Are you at sea level?
The internal textures too. The internal textures you can tell pretty quickly.
And so you're checking that, and oftentimes we'll check trees for a couple of weeks before my family will say, okay, these trees, they're ready. It's time to go and get the family and go and harvest together. And so I was thinking to myself, I was outside, I was thinking, there's so many people who maybe took that one harvesting class, or they didn't take a harvesting class, they went with a friend, and it was fun, but they didn't go with the intention and purpose of learning what that looked like, and then they never went back to the friend, so they're just kind of wandering around in the woods by themselves, and they think, oh, I'm just gonna like Facebook somebody and ask them if it's time. And I really want to caution you, you know, we check and we really spend an extended amount of time together, and you don't ever go into the woods alone. And I promised I wouldn't say don'ts. I'm sorry. We said we're going to talk about experiences, not don'ts. You shouldn't have given me the ginseng. Your turn, Teresa.
I think we should talk about personal conduct too, because there's a value system that's very much ingrained in harvesting. For me, and I know that Gloria and I, we share this. I think it's really universal in our family. For me, the forest is my sanctuary, and I'm very much alive with the world there. I know that I'm a guest. I know that forest does not belong to me, so every time I enter the forest, I go in with respect. I am certain to not bring my bad feelings into the forest. That's something that really takes a lot of practice and is really challenging, especially if you know trees are ready to be pulled. You have to be intact with your own personal health. I often will even be in the forest and know that I'm going to need to maybe ask for guidance and support and courage. Those are things that every time I go in there, people say the word pray. We all have different religions, and I have my own personal belief system. So I use pray because it works for the English language, but it's my special time to be like with your elders, like all of the wisdom and all of that knowledge and all of that strength that our cedar trees give us. It is a sanctuary for me. It's one of the only places where I can be 100% vulnerable and know I'm not going to be judged, and know that I'm going to be able to walk away refreshed and with new light, and that I'm being held up. And so going into the forest with bad feelings is never,
Yeah, bad feelings or rushed or because you only have a certain amount of time, all of those kind of things will affect your experience, and it's going to affect the quality of the cedar that pulls off those trees. It really will.
Well, energy is important, so if you leave that energy in there, talking bad in the forest, gossip, or what people might consider gossip, absolutely not. I think you are really with the most prestigious spirits. Everything that goes on while you're in the forest, you have to be very mindful about what it is that you do, say, your thought processes. You have to be very intact with those things. And it takes a lot of practice to do that, but it becomes your second nature once you start to be intentional with what your actions and your thought processes are. You have to be very intentional.
And so I think that, I've taught harvesting classes before, and I really do give a whole bunch of, like, hey, be careful about that. We don't do this, because you really want to, because I realize that the majority of the people who harvest cedar bark, I feel like, previously on this land that is Tlingitani, probably learned from myself or one of my students, my mother or one of her students, my grandmother or one of her students, or my great-grandmother or one of her students in this area. And so for me, when I see a tree that's fully girded, that's on the roadside, that has all these things, I have this moment of, was I not a good teacher? Did I not pay attention? How did somebody not hear the inappropriateness of this? And so for me, I was talking to Teresa, I feel like I have this responsibility to have a conversation again and say, these are the ways that we do them, and they're not suggestions. There's long-standing traditional ecological knowledge that's around how you go ahead and take care of and have that space, and there's reasons why we do that, because
there's policies. It's intellectual property, and there's policies and protocols that go along with that, and if you don't follow those, then we don't have balance, and if we don't maintain balance, then clearly, we can look at the environment now, we fall out of balance.
And for instance, like in our area, like most people are harvesting the way a Haida would harvest, not the way a Tlingit traditionally harvested. So Haidas, we would take, like there's a certain amount of the tree that you can take without killing it. However, you don't take up to that amount, so a good rule of thumb is like 1/8 of the tree. And that's if the tree is talking to you in a way that it's because, and you can do more than that without killing the tree, but should you take more without killing the tree? I think it really is, when I say talking to a tree, I mean, we're checking, is it moist? What's the color? What's the texture? Is the top dead? Does it have woodpeckers? What are the animals doing around it? How thick is the bark at the bottom? When you pull it off, what does the texture, when you touch the cedar tree, how thick is it when you pull it apart? What's the sap grain look like? All of these things.
Are you tugging on it? If you're having to tug on it, then the tree's talking to you. No.
And so,
or the canopy, if you're disturbing
is there a sunny side with a lot of branches versus a not branches side? Are you absolutely making sure to be as far away from the road as possible, not doing on the roadside? There are all of these things that I'm listening to, and then when I see that tree is perfect, right? Then that's what I do. And for me,
can you talk about really quick, because you're moving quickly? Yeah. Why do we not harvest on the roadside?
So the reason why, there's several reasons why we don't harvest on the roadside. First, we have respect for everybody else who uses the forest. Everybody else who uses the forest. And not everybody is a weaver, right? And so you don't harvest on the roadside because you have respect for your neighbors. You have respect for those people who are walking through the woods. You have respect for people who weren't raised in your cultural values and knowledge system, that don't know that you transformed that bark into a rope or a beautiful basket, that it moved from one spirit to another. So we have respect for everybody who utilizes that space, not just respect for ourselves and not just respect for our clans, but respect for everybody else. We also have respect for our elders. If we don't harvest next to the roadside, because there's going to be a day that we're physically not able to make it up the mountain. And when we can't make it up the mountain, we're going to hope that there's a tree relatively close that we can go. Like I'm going to hope that people haven't harvested so terribly near the roadside constantly in Ketchikan that my grandmother, who cannot see now, that I can pull her out of a car and I can walk her into the woods and I can stand her next to a cedar tree. That only happens if everybody is going as far as they physically are able. And you're supposed to listen to the tree too. You don't just go, oh, this tree looks like whatever. Like you're having a conversation and you're seeing that tree's going to speak to you, and you might harvest that tree. But how will you know if it's talking to you if you take the first thing that says hi? Right?
Disease and toxins is that's really an inevitable. It's completely inevitable. So if you are harvesting on
A logging road,
trailheads, anywhere, think about everything that's in our air. That's all impacting and infecting our trees. And so disease is a very big thing. It's not just with human beings, it's with our other living world. It's very important.
and it's going to attach itself. So you've exposed it. You've taken a piece off. It's going to. So if you're right next to a roadside, all that dust is kicking up, all that thing. Maybe you have like a logging trucks that are going by. It's throwing kind of all of its stuff, or a rock quarry. It's all going to kind of affect this exposed living being, where the literally the area that they kind of get their life and push it through their tree, it's all completely exposed. And so staying away from that is just super important.
Being exposed. Speaking of this, I had this conversation with our other sister, our first cousin, Carrie Ann Vanderhoop. I was on Dl'a Gwa, and I was out looking for, I was with somebody that worked for the Forest Service, and he wanted me to go look at some of our monumentals. So we went out into the field and I looked at monumentals, and Dl'a Gwa is different. It's not mountainous like it is here. It's pretty flat. And he was sharing with me these beautiful locations of all of these gorgeous cedars, and they were the right cedars to be harvested. And he told me, or he had phoned me, we went and looked, and I saw, and it was an incredible experience, but he had phoned me like 3 days later and said, they're falling logs, and they're all red cedars. Do you want to take the bark off of them before they fall, or after they fall? And I grappled with it for a while. I wasn't sure about my thought process, so I went and talked with my cousin. And I said, I don't want to do it because, so I got 3 phone calls. They didn't want to waste the cedar. Why don't I take the bark? And I was so thankful that we had a conversation, because the conversation really surrounded exactly what our value systems have been instilled in us. I have a relationship with the cedar tree, and just taking a dead tree and taking the bark off of a dead tree. I couldn't think of anything that would be so disrespectful as a living being if something like that was to happen to me. Like, there's integrity, and that tree has got it's a valuable spirit, and so cutting down a tree and taking all of its bark off of it didn't make any sense. And again, I was just thankful that my cousin and I had that conversation. She started to cry when she told me, and I shared my story with her. And she's like, no, this is a relationship that you have. And I think that's one of the key points about people who are harvesters and they make those choices to go and get cedar bark. You have to have a relationship with the living world and have a really strong sense of respect. Otherwise, you are going to end up in a place that probably is not good for you, because everything is reciprocal and it can find you in different forms. And I believe it 100%.
And we were having this conversation. I realized that I had a slightly different way that I came from it. I agree with both Teresa and Carrie Ann, but I had a conversation with my mom, because I do remember one time when my nanny and my mom went, there were some trees that were coming down, and they went and they took the bark. And afterwards, Mom came back and she said, we really didn't want to waste this gift of the cedar tree. We knew that they were going to be turning them, they were going to turn them into some culturally modified items. They were going to be carved on afterwards, and so they really wanted to do that. And she said, the real danger with it is you don't have the ability to have that conversation. So you can't really talk to the tree. So you won't know, like if the tree is laying down flat, you don't know if it's going to be a straight grain tree. You don't know how it's going to pull. You don't know what that looks like. You don't know, will it be bruised? What will it look like? And so you're saying, this relationship and having that spirit, that's also that conversation, right? Of being able to know and look at, and what does that look like? You don't know how long it's been sitting there. And all those things will be affected. And I actually had a conversation with my mom, and like, I don't know, if somebody were to call me tomorrow, if I probably would say no to something that had already been followed, but it probably wouldn't be for the same reason that Teresa would. It would be because I didn't have a conversation, and I couldn't see the tree, and so I wouldn't know what the results would be, right? Like, and it'd probably be different because, when you pull red cedar down, it kind of snaps in different areas, and then you're going to get these little chunks, right? And so I imagined that it would just be too much work. And I said, well, what would I do if somebody called me because they were going to take down trees? Like, they were going to take down trees, they want you to take the whole thing off. Because then there's this automatic, the idea of girding a tree. What would that look like for me? And I thought, I wouldn't know until I stood next to the tree, honestly, because, there's that conversation. Like, I think I wouldn't know one way or another, because first of all, the whole cedar tree is never going to be cedar that was meant to be something in the first place, right? Generally, like when you're harvesting, you're going to see it and you're going to be like, oh, this is really straight grain. You had a conversation, the tree's kind of letting you know how much is going to happen. So even in the case where people don't want to waste, they think they're being super generous with the idea of taking down this tree. The reality is half the tree is going to be full of branches and a lot of holes, right? And so, and how you explain that to folks, when I'll get phone calls all the time and from people and be like, we're going to take these 3 beautiful little cedar trees down. Would you like to come in and pull them? And in my mind, I think, well, I wouldn't mind pulling a certain amount, but I certainly don't want the whole tree, because the whole tree doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's disrespectful to the spirit of the tree, for folks who, looking at that. Because the idea of girding a tree is so ingrained, we're so ingrained never to do it. Like, it's like part of the conversation all the time, not to do it. But it really is going to be about the relationship. The conversation, the relationship. Is the sap flowing? What does it look like? What does the branches look like? I always endeavor to make sure the tree is going to live. And so the idea of going out and getting even to have a super great harvest is just like, oh no, like it just kind of hits your spirit, because you're like,
It's magic.
It's absolutely opposite of kind of what you're taught as far as being used. But I had said something about how most of the cedar trees in this area are harvested the way the haidas do, right? I want to say that there is a thing which is called a 4-leaf clover method that you don't see in this area anymore, but traditionally Tlingit people in certain areas harvested 4 times. But they didn't harvest 4 times in a year. They would go to a cedar grove and they would take one strip from one side. And then 25 years later, they'd go to the same grove and take one strip. And 25 years after that or so, somebody else from their family would come and take another strip.
So it's a generational harvest.
And then somebody would come, and so you can look in these really sacred old places. You can find this 4-leaf clover system in which generations of families have gone and taken just this one strip. Now, haidas, we don't ever harvest from a tree that's been harvested before. So you get one bite at the apple. We go, we look at it. That tree has decided to become a beautiful woven item. You harvest from it. And when you go back into the woods again, we never harvest from that tree again. Can you imagine people who had a traditional ecological knowledge of a place that they farmed, literally? They went and they knew, and their families went to that place for generations. The other thing my mom wanted me to mention is a lot of people just go get 1 or 2 cedar trees, like in one place, right? And you're like, oh, this is what we need. In my family, with my mom particularly, we walk and walk and walk and walk until we find a beautiful cedar grove. And a cedar grove is like 12 to 30, more like 15, 17 to 30, 35 cedar trees. And we'll go through, and then you harvest 1 and you leave 2, and you harvest 1 and you leave 2. And we never can ever find that place again. So it's kind of magical, right? And so, but going out into that space because we're going as a family unit, we're all going together. we're all in that area with our food and our laughing, and and we're looking for places on a slight incline, right? You want it to be a little bit of an incline so that you're gonna
hope it's a slight incline. That's not how it works when you're getting yellow cedars. Boom! It is that. There's a lot of tumbling.
And in our particular case, we went with children very young, and so always mossy places so that you can swing off your first cedar tree into a big pile of moss when it falls. I just, I just have to emphasize that I find what we're seeing around Ketchikan so concerning right now. The amount of trees that are girded on places, the ways in which people are taking an axe to a space, and it's so disrespectful to the life of the tree. And I want everybody who's listening to know I know who harvested every tree, and I know or who you learned from, because the way you learned shows on your tree. So if you're girding a tree, I absolutely know who you probably learned from. It's pretty obvious. You can tell by how far down on the bark you do, middle-wise. So if you're going into a tree and you think, oh, nobody knows who did that, no. People who harvested and teach, we absolutely know who our students are. We know which of the students listened, and we know which of the students chose never to go to a class again and started going off by themselves. So I think there's this idea that you're anonymous when you're out there and you're breaking those rules in the woods. Weavers talk to each other. People who are in woods talk to each other. My students always come back to me and let me know if they've been in the woods with somebody, and they ask if it's wrong. And I try never to say anybody's wrong. I say, hey, this is a way that these people do this, that this is the reason why you don't, please don't teach any method other than the method that you learned from me. I also like to say and I never emphasize that because I'm not a weaver. I weave, but I don't produce things. So I weave, I just don't ever finish a project. You'll find none of my pieces in museums. They're in private collections. But I think it's really important to know that in the traditional sense, when you learned to harvest from somebody and you apprenticed under somebody, you're supposed to keep bringing bark back to the person. If you get good enough to harvest bark on your own, then you've graduated. And when you graduated, you're supposed to be bringing some of that bark back to the people who taught you. I say that because my nanny is 95 years old, right? And everything. She taught a plethora of people. But you don't just... in the traditional sense, that's what you would do, is you would harvest and harvest and harvest with your instructor, and then you would go ahead and you would be able to prepare it so well that in their old age, they would never have to worry that they had to go out and get anything. And so I think that that's a piece that's missing, like when we're teaching at the Heritage Center in various classes. It's a piece that's missing in that just like when you fish for your first time and do those things, that there's always a reciprocity of bringing back, and the relationship that you make with your teacher and the relationship that you make with the woods, with your sister cedar trees, are so important. I know you had like 4 things that really caught you that you wanted to say, and I just kept talking.
I like your words, they're good, but I think that is really important too, is there's folks that don't really know how to harvest. They're doing it. They know what the tree looks like, and maybe that tree is going to pull, but they don't know how to care for it properly. And the only way that you can learn how to do that is to have a lot of experience and really trust your teachers, and to spend time with them observing. Again, the way that we've learned is not, nobody sits around and tells you what or how to do anything. You're just there and you're completely immersed in the experience. And so through those visual pieces, those learning pieces are, they're central to who we are, not just in the world of harvesting and weaving, but they're central to us as a Haida nation and as Haida people in our full practices. And so a lot of people are getting cedar bark and they're doing it the wrong way because they didn't spend enough time. They didn't listen, and maybe their teachers didn't give them an opportunity, or I think a lot of times when we live in a different world that holds a lot of different values, you kind of have a foot in and a foot out. And so, and also harvesting cedar bark is probably one of those joyful, fun things on earth. It's
fun.
It's so much fun. It feels right. So I think that can be a little bit intoxicating. And then people's, they have a little internal arrogance about it, thinking they know how to do it correctly.
We were talking about our experience that we had where Teresa very much kind of just watched and learned, her mom, let her talk about it. And my experience was different. I went out with my mother, and my brothers learned very early on how she wanted those cedar trees to be harvested, and she really spent a lot of conversations with them on the spirituality, how they talk to the tree, what they should do, since they were really small, right? They were harvesting since they were tiny, and she was always there with them. Nani was always there with them, but I never really got to touch trees. But I did get to touch bark when she was, which is different, I think, than Teresa will talk about her experience, and that the tester tree, because we always take a tester strip. Every tester strip my mother would give to me when I was little, or my grandmother, and I would sit by them with a knife, and I couldn't touch any other cedar. I would just pull that tester strip. And I pulled that tester strip, I think, until I was like 22 or something. I mean, I only pulled the tester strip. That's all I did, was pull that tester strip. And then one day, Mom said, "You're teaching harvesting." And I was like, how did I go from tester strip to teaching cedar bark harvesting? She said, "Oh no, those tester strips look good now. You can go and do that." and I taught with my brother Aaron, and it was really funny because I feel like I went from tester strip Gloria to teaching harvesting, but it was that continuous watching of what that looked like. And even now, I have such a hard time when we harvest yellow cedar, because yellow cedar, you really can only let your knife touch it once, so you can't make this. And my mother is so particular about her yellow cedar. Even now, half the time, I don't split down the yellow cedar because I know she's so particular about it that we get it off the tree, I set it up, I do the one split in half, and then I'm like, okay, the next 2 strips, I know that my nani these are for my nani and these are for my mom, and I'm just not going to touch them because they have to be rolled a different way, they have to be hang overnight, they have all these kind of things that are very specific to those ladies and exactly how they want them to do.
That must be where I got it from. I don't let anybody prepare my cedar bark. I'm very choosy.
But it's to this point, right? But it's the difference, and then this watching and not asking a lot of questions.
Yeah.
We didn't ask a lot of questions, but I just, she gave you the knife and gave you the knife and gave you the knife, and that was my experience. But Teresa had an experience where she very much watched her
An
mother.
observer. I feel like our time is running out quickly.
Okay. Did we give all the don'ts?
We didn't do really good don'ts.
Oh,
I'm so
shoot.
proud of us.
Okay.
High
Well,
five.
no. Don't harvest next to the roadside. Don't harvest too early. What else? You're so irritated with me.
How about a do?
Do.
Please enter the forest with a clear mind and respect.
Yeah.
Because everything in there is a life form. Even my nani, the rocks, you don't step on rocks unnecessarily. Even spruce root harvesting, you don't fuss with the strawberries patches that are around there. You're just mindful about everything. Just be mindful.
You don't go into the woods on your menstrual. I mean, I'm going to say that, besides being eaten by the bear, you just don't, there are things that you don't do and things that you do. You do go in, you do go in early in the morning, before anything else has happened and everything. I think that there's a tendency in this modern world kind of rush through your day, but the one time that my nani did that, where she didn't adhere to that project, that she broke her wrist. The shadows were different. She fell into a root system and she broke her wrist. And so, you do what is important, that first thing that you can, and you give all of your energy for it. Do make sure you go for one thing. Like you might go out and gosh, you see some Devil's Club and you see some guaica and you see some berries and everything. When you go out with the intention for one thing, and you do that and you do it well. Because you can always come back later for that. But if you've gone with the intention of going out for one thing, you do go out, you prepare yourself and you go for that one thing and you do it well. Do process your cedar right away.
Yes.
It's, sometimes, this world is so busy and you have to take the cedar out of the woods.
And remember, we said how fun it is, so you can get carried away. So you don't take any more than you need.
Yeah.
It's very hard. You have to condition yourself, and you have to have discipline.
Need-
You never take more than you need.
Need and what you can process, right? You need and process is important. Like there'll be always, like, if you've never taken a harvesting class before, you go out and you be like, oh, I'm gonna get 3 bags, and then you're sitting in the 3 bags realizing
Don't sleep for days.
not sleeping for days, realizing that you really aren't prepared to harvest. To prepare those 3 days, that your body is exhausted. You didn't expect it to be so painful in the woods, So really, do take care of yourself. Do go mindful. Do make sure that you're not hungry, that you're well hydrated, that you go as far off that road system as you possibly can. Really allow the experience of looking at each of the trees and letting your knowledge of them and that conversation be great. Really do make sure to thank those trees, to say a blessing, whatever that means. But that we acknowledge those cedar trees and that space for what they're giving. And that's going to be different for all of us, right? I know people who give a tobacco offering at every tree. I know people who talk to that first, because they're in a grove of trees and there's like 14, and they have a conversation out loud. And some people just put their hand on the tree and just allow themselves to exchange that energy and have that conversation. But I think really when we move something from a piece of cedar bark that came off a cedar sister into a rope or a hat or a basket, we're really transforming it from one thing to another. And that is integral.
That's why it's very
spirit.
important when you're out in the woods to make sure you take that outer bark and it stays in the forest, because even though it's not on the cedar tree any longer, it becomes a new life form and a home for other things that are in the forest, for all those other life forms. So that's really critical. Don't take that bark somewhere that it doesn't belong. That it's very important to keep it in the forest. And then when you go home, then you can do your reduction pieces and split it down.
And so that's the spiritual aspect of it. That's the being a good caretaker. That's traditional ecological knowledge. We leave the outer bark and only take the cambium. That's traditional and ecological knowledge, but it's also a spiritual connection. It's a relationship with all the other things, right? And so oftentimes, because it's not comfortable to people, we don't have the conversation about the spiritual connection, but there is a spiritual reason why we do it. And then there's a traditional ecological knowledge reason why we do it. And then there's just a common sense thing. If you take the bark on the tree and it gets back, all your bark will be bruised. So you can choose not to care about the spiritual aspect or the traditional ecological knowledge aspect. But if you take all the red cedar bark that's left on the tree back out of the woods, you'll have a crack right here, and you'll have a crack right here, and you'll have a crack right here, and you'll have a crack right here. And your cedar tree will be, you won't do what you promised, which is transform it into something pretty. Because you'll have not, it won't meet those because you didn't pay attention to what it needed. What other things? Do we have something positive to say? I know I feel
like we said everything positive.
Well, I was negative, but that's okay. That's who I am. People appreciate it.
There are don'ts, but the do's are really important. I think we talked about when.
Yeah, when and
where.
Yeah, when and where. And so sometimes there's a second season, right? For cedar bark, you really have to pay attention to that. Like if you have an early season, and depending on the weather, you'll have a time frame that you can get it. And cedar is going to come off at different periods based upon elevation. Like if it's next to the water, next to the sunny side, it's further up. Those are all going to kind of affect when it'll come into season. And every once in a while, like it'll be really bizarre and it'll be really fast. Like what was that one year when it came in July and then it was out and we were like out there? It was, it's strange. There'll be like, sometimes you get this second season, the cedar bark is beautiful, but it's almost like a fluke. And so you can get these second seasons of them, but you really, again, have to pay attention to what the world around you is doing, to whether or not, just because you can do it, should you do it? I think is always the thing. Just because you can, should you? And when you're paying attention to, is there a wood? You don't harvest with a tree with a woodpecker because the tree is dying. Is the top dead? How straight grained is the cedar? There's all these plethora of things that you'll take after you take an actual harvesting class or start a traditional apprenticeship with a teacher who knows what they're doing, and then, or you get a group of like 4 friends who are harvesters who kind of together you make a community of people who are always together. You go out together and you create this, and you'll find that once you find those group of people who are absolutely respectful of harvesting cedar and do it, you don't want anybody else. You're not interested in harvesting with anybody else. You'll go out with one person who will like do something, be like, this bananas. I cannot be seen in the woods with them. Gloria told me she knows exactly who's doing this, and I don't. And I don't want to be that person. But it is fun. It's addicting. It's joyful, and you just have to really approach it in the most respect with people that are going to follow those rules, because it's important to leave. We have a responsibility, all of us, to leave the woods better than we came into them. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? And so, and to respect that there are all sorts of other users. And I think that that's extremely important. And my family, we've taught a lot of folks, and I definitely pay attention. And don't leave, if you make a mistake, this is key, if you make a mistake and you're harvesting cedar bark and it gets stuck on a branch, you got to figure out how to get it off that branch. We don't ever leave it on there. So really listen to your tree. When it gets up and it gets stuck on there, you can get one stuck and you could be swinging for weeks, but you don't ever leave a cedar a piece hanging on there.
That's so horrible to see. That's a terrible thing to see. Your cedars will talk to you.
Yeah.
The trees are really generous with their information and their friendships. They'll let you know. You'll know almost, I can tell immediately if a cedar wants, even if we're in season and I go down to a different patch, and those cedars are happy to share their cedar bark with me, and then you walk maybe 12 minutes down the other way. Who knows why?
Yeah.
Just to say that's not what their purpose was, and then you have to be really in tune with the relationship. It's a relationship.
And
that tree does not pull, and you can feel your hand slide. There's like this beautiful connection.
Oh my
once you
gosh.
make a cut, and you'll slide your hand down the very center of it, and you can feel like this relationship, and it's the trees telling you.
Yeah. Or you slide your hand up, like you make that insert down at the bottom, and then you put your hands inside and go,
because it's gonna
pulls, and you kind of push it right up, and you can kind of smell it, and the kind of the
it even tastes
the
sweet.
sap is kind of dripping off your hand, and you kind of push it up and whatnot. I think that sometimes one of the things that I'm really trying to download everything. You really have to pay attention to grain. Sometimes people take like a butcher knife and or a knife, and they'll push it all the way up. And I have a couple of people that are really close to me that do that. And the reason why they do it is they want it to go really far. And I think, and my nanny has done it.
Because it tapers when you pull. Like if you cut at the bottom of the tree, right? So maybe you do like a 5-inch or 3-inch. It's usually tapers off to one side. So when people start to cut, they really want to try to get as much cedar from their first pull as possible. And so that's what she's talking about.
And so they do that. And my nanny has done it. But the difference is, I guess, with my nanny is she's paying attention to a grain of the cedar, right? So she knows. But if you just go 2 straight lines down here and then you try to, like from here to here with the knife, what happens is if the grain of the cedar tree is not correct, there you're going across grain. So when you go to split it, it's going to split in these little chunks. So, so when you're taking and we take from the very bottom, and the reason why we take from as far down as possible, my family, is because we usually leave this much in the woods, because that's where your hands are and you're doing it. So we go as far down as possible, and then we make the incision no bigger than the width of your hand, and then I'll push it up with my hand and not with a knife, because I want the grain not to mess with that. Like if I want to see right away on that first one if the grain's going somewhere, because if the grain's not straight, it's the only piece I'm taking. I'm not taking another piece, right? You're pushing it up. But some people take 2 knives and they'll go down like this because they really want it to be straight. But when you do that, what you're going to go ahead and doing is, if it's not a straight grain tree, all you've got is a lot of heartache and hard work that is not going to be helpful at all. That isn't even really good for rope. So you really, if you really, again, you've got to talk to the tree, you've got to listen to what the environment is telling you. And my mom always recommends, and so I recommend it too, to leave that first, if you go to the very bottom, to leave this in the woods, because some people take it for birds and whatnot, but the reality is it should, stay in the woods because you've bruised it using it to swing and to leverage, and so.
Well, that's its home,
Yeah.
so it belongs there,
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
all of the foods
Yeah.
that we harvest, every crab shell, every shrimp, everything that I eat, it's in my garage right now. All those shells go back out into the ocean. That's where they belong.
Yeah.
And that's where the cedar bark, that's where it belongs.
Okay. Where, when, how much stays in the forest? Did we talk enough about energy?
I think we did. Does anybody have a question?
So Teresa is a teacher, so she lists primary objectives, and we have our primary objectives sitting out there. Does anybody have a question or whatnot? We're just so thankful you guys stopped by.
Look at you.
We're just thankful you stopped in. Respectful harvesting is especially important because we're growing so many weavers in our area. Like our family grew weavers, and now you have other really great teachers growing weavers, but there will be a certain point that we can't sustain the appropriate things that we need to sustain a weaving population in our area. And that shouldn't happen because traditionally in this area, there were people who lived here for hundreds of thousands of years. And there were still cedar trees around for us to harvest from. They harvested in such a way that there was longevity, right? And so we too, and if you think about it, every home had weavers in it. Prior to contact, everybody was weavers, and they used weaving for everything, right?
It's
Everything.
utilitarian.
Utilitarian. Everything was being
Everything's
weaving. So
utilitarian.
there's no reason why now that we have a community of weavers that are not weaving for the necessities of their life, why we couldn't leave this environment in a way that everybody still could go ahead and have what they need. So we have to have that mindset of saying, like, if you think about it, the weaving population is not big compared to the weaving population that was prior to contact because everybody had weavers. And so why is it that we're having a difficulty with resources, of cedar when we really shouldn't? Because even the impacts of previous logging doesn't account. We have trees everywhere. It's how are we taking care of that, and how are we being mindful? Because certainly the population of weavers, even though it's very large in Ketchikan, is not comparable to the amount of weavers that lived in this land historically.
No,
and so there's something
Amazon.
Exactly. So there's something about the traditional and ecological knowledge that we're not utilizing to its fullest extent for that to be an issue.
It's talking to each other about
Yeah.
what we learn.
Yeah.
Just tell my students that too.
Are you going to sing us a song, Teresa? Go ahead, Mary.
So
Only
I
if you
don't
dance.
see any books of the golden rules of being out in the woods.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You guys seem like perfect.
Mary. So I think that's what we struggle with, right? Is we want people, like for me, I want everybody to have a weaver in its household again. I want my Nani Selena, my Nani Dolores, they would always say, even if you're not Haida Tlingit or Tsimshian, if you look at the origins of all of our people, we all came from weaving. We had to have that basically. So it's something
how we're
that
woven together.
it's how we're connected,
It's part
right?
of the tapestry of the human experience. When you go into other different cultures, everybody was weaving.
And
it was
so-
well before people were carving.
Yeah.
Like, we were weaving.
And so that connects us, right? So it connects us, Haida, Tlingit, Tsimshian, to our Norwegian family and friends, to everybody, right? We all came from
Vietnam, all over the place.
that, so
Nani's traveled everywhere.
so we all came from weavers, right? And so I imagine, for me, I would love to have a society that was so intricately connected to the place and to the cedar trees and to the mountain goat, that everybody, it was just normal, that we all had that basic ability to connect with our ancestors and with our neighbors through weaving. But what that requires for us is to have a communal mindset, respect, about traditional and ecological knowledge, about inherent, right to our culture and how we share it and what that looks like. It really requires that conversation. I agree that there aren't golden rules, and I think that's because we come from a Haida perspective. We know that Tsimshian and Tlingit people did it differently, right? We come from spruce root weavers who, arranged marriage that ended us up on the Alaska side of the border, where my Nani Selena didn't have access to spruce root, and so she learned to harvest red cedar from the people from Metlakatla. And so we know that. And my Nani's finally book will be published soon. I don't know how much she goes into Cedar Bark protocol and harvesting.
It's good amount.
But I think the more we know, and the more, without being mean, like I don't ever want to shame somebody for not doing something right, but I think if we have the conversation, if people can see how passionate Teresa is and I am about our spiritual connection to the woods and stuff, it puts in a different perspective and say, well, it might not be the connection that I have, but I can respect there are these people that it means something different for. And I am utilizing something that was not originally mine, and I will respect it in that same way, because what I have is a gift from somebody else to be able to participate in that.
I think it's like with all relationships, though. If you can't participate in a relationship in a healthy way, then you have to make choices for yourself on whether or not you're going to share that space. And it's for me, because my relationship with the living world, and in particular with the Cedars, it's highly intimate. It's like a relationship you would have with another human being. If you know it's not a healthy place for you, and you know you can't contribute to it in a healthy way, then you alleviate yourself from that. You step back until you're ready and you're prepared to do that. If you're not prepared to do it, then it ends up not being your calling. If you find a place in a time where you're prepared to be an active, respectful participant in the relationship, then you can revisit it. Mm-hmm. But I feel that way very much about my relationship with the Cedars. Well, and with the natural world and the spirit world.
But we also cry. Like, I don't go by a girded tree and just walk by it. Like, I sit and I cry at that tree. Like, the idea that, that you could have harvested respectfully, that you could have turned this piece into something beautiful, that you didn't have to kill it. Like, it didn't have to be dead, this idea, and so, it really is hard. It's hard to be in a car with my grandmother and my mother and my sister Teresa when you go by and you see, like, that kind of reality, because we're also in Tlingit. We also know that they did a 4-leaf clover, like that. So for them, it's like a generational harvesting. Like, it's completely there's no opportunity for those people to go generationally to a space now because it's been destroyed.
Yeah.
We should end with a song. You want to sing for me?
You sing for me.
Ayo, ie, ala, hey, ayo, ala, we, hey, you, we, hey, ayo. Thank you all for coming.